everything is connected.
Mm.
So an individual and their environment is actually co-creating each other at the same time. Turning this conversation about burnout on its head really is, yes, don't focus just on the individual, but also don't focus just on the systems, right? They are one. What Bloom does is it brings those two things together. It creates space for people that are leading towards burnout to recognize that it's not just the system around them, that they can make changes too. And by making those changes, they're actually hopefully making changes to the system long term, because it's co-creation. The lifestyle balance is about choosing intentionally where to spend energy and where to pull back, right? Not I happen to land in a situation and so I must do what I need to do, but taking a step back and really examining all of your roles and asking yourself, what feels heavy? Why does it feel heavy? What can I do about it?
Welcome back to the Soul Inspiring Business Podcast. Today, I am joined by the brilliant Dr. Chetna Sethi, PhD, occupational therapist, executive coach, and author of the new book, Cultures That Bloom: Take Your Organization from Burnout to Balance. Chetna's work sits at the powerful intersection of leadership, systems thinking, and sustainable well-being, helping everyone from overwhelmed parents to executives and organizations rethink burnout at the root, not as a personal failure, but as a systems challenge. And in today's conversation, we're diving into what it really takes to build a life, career, and culture that allows people to thrive without losing themselves in the process. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for having me.
Yes, well, I'm so excited to be here. We were introduced by a mutual friend just, I guess, a few weeks ago. And since our conversation, I was super excited to introduce you to our listeners. And because I think burnout is, gosh, it's such an important topic. Especially, I'm sitting in my mid 40s and I feel like that's when a lot of that starts, right? When you're having kids and having life changes and trying to run a business. And so it's certainly very timely. And I guess, just to kind of start off, if you could share with our listeners, how did this concept come about? I know it's been years in the making. So can you share with us a little bit about this idea of Bloom and the framework that you're using to help people with burnout?
Sure. Thanks for that question. My journey actually started as an occupational therapy student. And I started developing an interest in pediatrics from day one. I loved kids. So I graduated and I started working with kids. And I realized very quickly that working with a child means that you're working with the family, right? Because the child doesn't have the autonomy to go home and do the things that you're telling them to do in therapy. And so my focus shifted a lot to the parents. And my main focus then became, how do parents make decisions every day? And so my PhD dissertation was actually about parental decision making. So my first ever framework was born out of that work. And then I moved into academia and I actually applied the model to other parents, to leaders, to students, to faculty members, and CEOs in the community that I was meeting and having conversations with. And what's developed now as Bloom is, like you were saying, moving away from that individualistic point of view, but moving towards systems point of view, right? And that's what I find interesting and sort of unfortunate, if I may.
Yeah.
Is that the individual and the systems are placed on a continuum where they both are at opposite ends. And I take issue with that. Because I'm a strong believer in the transactional perspective. I have been heavily inspired by John Dewey's work. And for those of you that don't know him, he was a psychologist, he was a philosopher, he was an educator. And he did a lot of education research. And his ideas about work and about learning were related to doing, right? Doing as learning. And his transactional perspective really shaped my thinking which essentially means that everything is connected.
Mm.
So an individual and their environment is actually co-creating each other at the same time. And everything is one big whole. So I could do something here and, 200 miles away somewhere, something might happen and it could be connected. That's what the butterfly effect tells us, right?
Yes.
And so my idea behind turning this conversation about burnout on its head really is, yes, don't focus just on the individual, but also don't focus just on the systems, right?
Mm.
They are one. And so what Bloom does is it brings those two things together, and it creates space for people that are leading towards burnout to recognize that it's not just the system around them, that they can make changes too. And by making those changes, they're actually hopefully making changes to the system long
Mm.
term, because it's co-creation, right? So
Yes.
that's where Bloom fits in. And of course, it's an acronym, and we can talk about that um, as you see fit. If you have another question, or I'll take more.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say it's so aligned that we're talking and we're in this space together right now, because for all of our listeners that have heard me talk many, many times of, just kind of the grander co-creation, like how you're constantly in motion and creating. And also even the idea of the podcast was created by the fact that, business is not different than your like who you are in the world, and soul and spirituality, and they're all interconnected. And so certainly it would be no surprise that, of course, as we talk about burnout as it relates to the individual and the system, they're just all one interconnected whole. We can't look at something
Exactly.
in a vacuum, right?
Exactly.
And as you change one thing within the system and one thing in the individual, you have the ability to impact the whole sphere.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. Spot on. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So I love how you just really elegantly and beautifully put that into words just a moment ago. So thank you for that. And yeah, I'd love to hear more about and I think our listeners will too, about the acronym and how that came about and what does that mean, Bloom?
Mm-hmm.
What is that framework exactly?
Sure. So it's a funny story how the framework name actually came about, because it's a dialogue from one of my new favorite Christmas movies on Netflix. It's called Single All the Way, and there's a dialogue in it where one of the characters in it absolutely loves plants, like talks to his plants and takes care, like they're his companion. They are his emotional support plants. And his mom makes him a sign for Christmas that he can hang up that says "Bloom where you're planted." And I'd heard that before, right? And that phrase made so much sense to me in terms of people that unfortunately don't have the luxury of leaving a job that they don't like, or leaving a situation in which they're struggling, or don't have the power to speak out against what they're feeling or what
Mm.
they're experiencing. They might have to pay bills. They might not be in a financially secure place to be able to walk away from a job just because you're feeling burnt out, right? Everyone thinks that everyone's burnt out these days. It's a status symbol to be burnt out. It means you're a hard worker,
Mm.
right? And that's such a misconception, right? Because your burnout is when you're stretching yourself a little too much. But some people don't have the luxury of not doing that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so bloom where you're planted, to me, said, no matter what situation you end up in, you have to make the most of it, because you might not be in control of what's around you.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
And so this is where I feel like organizational psychology does a really good job, but also falls short. It focuses too much on the system, right? It focuses on the fact that if you change the systems, everything will be great. But like you and I just talked about, it's a co-creation, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if a system changes, there's going to be a reaction. And the same way, if a person that's feeling a certain way brings up a conversation or sets a boundary in a non-threatening manner, it can still move the needle, though very, very slightly. But it gives hope to those people that are simply navigating situations that they're stuck in and are unable to move out of.
Mm.
And so that's where Bloom came from. And culture is something that in all of my work has shown up in almost everything I've done. So, as an influencer towards anything, right? Because
Hmm.
culture is also something that we co-create.
Yes.
So, yeah, so Bloom really is like a triangle, it's like a pyramid. And so, at the top, of course, is, burnout prevention, B for
Mm.
burnout prevention. That's our
Yeah.
end goal. The L stands for lifestyle balance. And this is where all of your roles come in. And this is my signature term for what people like to call work-life balance.
Mm.
Because I always say, and you said it too, it's not like you stop being a parent when you go to work, or it's not like you stop being a daughter when you're on a project, or it's not like you stop having a job when you go visit family, right? So um, there is no difference. There is no continuum or opposition between work and life, right? Life
Hmm.
encompasses a lot more than just work. So you can't just lump everything into one corner and give work that much importance, which is what we do in society, right? That's what our culture does, the hard work. So
Hmm.
the lifestyle balance is about choosing intentionally where to spend energy and where to pull back, right? Not I happen to land in a situation and so I must do what I need to do, but taking a step back and really examining all of your roles and asking yourself, what feels heavy? Why does it feel heavy? What can I do about it? Can I pull back and still gain the same amount of satisfaction from this particular role, while I'll have energy and time to put somewhere else where I feel like I'm struggling? So that's what lifestyle balance is. It's truly, I don't think it's a balance because balance doesn't exist. What I like to call it is strategic imbalance. And but it's strategic, right? You do it
Yeah.
on purpose, intentionally, and you do it to lighten your load and make your life a little bit easier. So that's lifestyle balance.
Okay.
Um,
Great.
the first O stands for organizational culture. And I say organizational culture because I've worked with a lot of organizations and businesses and small businesses. But really, the organizational culture that I'm talking about could be any organization you're part of, right? So that could be the institution of marriage. It could be the school system. It could be your place of worship, right? All of these have their own cultures. So
Mm.
instead of organizational culture as just something that happens in a corporate business setting, I think of it as much more holistic. So that's the microculture that you're navigating every day. Every single scenario that you're in, you are navigating what culture exists in that space. And you might
Hmm.
have to adapt yourself for that culture. And then you might move to a second space where you might have to adapt your culture and your manner of being again, because that space has a different microculture. It doesn't mean that you can't be authentic, or it doesn't mean that you're constantly masking. But there are certain unspoken rules, unspoken expectations, some norms that have just been established within groups that you automatically tend to follow if you're part of that culture. So that's
Mm.
where the organizational culture comes in, where how many microcultures are you actually navigating, right? What is
Yeah.
the toll on you to switch from one microculture to another constantly? Is there a time effort there? Is there a cognitive effort there? How much is that depleting your energy?
Mm.
And then my last two, O and M, are really happy outcomes. So I love the fact that all of this prevents burnout. But what I've noticed is that it also increases the level of satisfaction and life quality. And so my final O is optimal quality of life. And
Mm.
that really is a sense of feeling like you have meaning and a sense of purpose. And that you're able to engage in the things that you want to engage in within the constraints of your boundaries, your cultures, your systems. Right?
Mm.
And so that's what quality of life is. And then finally, the final M is the meaningful participation. And that's at the bottom because that is the foundation of everything.
Mm.
Um, and I'm actually in the process right now of developing a new definition for participation and meaningful participation, as well as one for culture. So stay tuned. But that's essentially that is what the Bloom framework does. So it combines not only the systems and the culture, but also takes into account the individual and its roles and how all of these work together instead of in
Mm,
isolation.
absolutely. Well, and thank you for sharing that. I
Mm-hmm,
have two questions in terms of how to kind of apply Bloom. One would be, let's say you're listening and you resonate with the label of being a high achiever and, feeling like, you have to push forward and you're running a business and you're running your family and all of these things, right? What are some, using the Bloom framework, where would you advise that person to start if they
mm-hmm,
want to start
mm-hmm,
trying, and maybe they feel like, oh, I'm kind of on the edge of
mm-hmm.
burnout because this doesn't feel sustainable. So
Absolutely.
where would you have them start?
That's a great question. And a lot of people ask me that. It's totally valid. And I like to give examples and I like to give my own example because unfortunately I did go through burnout myself. This journey would not have been the same had I not experienced it myself.
Mm,
And I was depleted. I did have to walk away from a job to be able to have my well being saved and my sanity. And I rebuilt from there. And so, some of the things that now I do consciously as a business owner, as a mom myself, as a spouse, as someone who takes care of two dogs, as someone who has aging parents, that's us, right? The mid 40s,
yeah.
that's just our job description these days, right? You're doing things in your career now because you're finally there. And however, you're in a position where you're having to take care of two generations, one ahead of you and one behind you,
Yeah.
at the same time. And so it's hard. And so some of the things that I do personally are simple things like maintaining boundaries. Now, that seems like a very ominous thing, right? Maintain boundaries. What does that even mean? And I like to think of boundaries as they're not walls, right? I like to say, think about a garden and think about a fence in that garden and think about a gate to that fence. That's your boundary.
Mm,
You can open the gate if you want. But if someone else is opening that gate for you, then your boundaries are being violated.
mm. I
And
love
that's what I try
that
to tell, yeah,
imagery of it.
right. And that's what I try
Yeah.
to tell people that remember to close the gate on your way out.
Mm, that's good.
So when you walk out from one microculture and go into another, make sure you're closing the door, right? And so for me, that simply looks like I close my laptop at the end of the workday. I close my eyes. I do a 2 minute just breathing session where everything slows down. My body just relaxes. And I tell myself, work is over. Now I'm in mom mode.
Mm,
And for me, that does the trick because suddenly my brain has told me, turn off the work stuff. And, I didn't think it would work because I'm one of those people that always has their phone zinging and pinging and always itching to reach my phone to see who emailed, whose message was that. But I turned my phone on silent and I decided that from the hours between 3:45 to 8:30, I will not have my cell phone with me. I will only have it if we're listening to music as a family or if we're talking to family on the phone and things like that. But I do not use it for work related things.
mm,
And I shift my mindset. And I tell myself, I will be back. Hold that thought. I will be back at 8:30. Because unfortunately, my life right now does look like that I'm spending more of my energy into my work than I am maybe perhaps into my social life. Am I maybe sacrificing a little bit of my sleep to be able to work? Yes, I am, because it's the season I'm in. I'm building a business, right? And slowly we begin to realize that when we take a step back and all we have to do to start is bring awareness. Just notice.
mhm.
Notice a few things. Notice when you walk into a room or a space or with a certain gathering or certain group of people, what's expected in that room? What's valued in that room? What is not valued in that room?
Mm,
Right? And those are how you tend to express what sort of microcultures that you live in, right? Because that is what microculture is the unsaid things that just happen, right? And work, it might look like a clear policy that says the job is 9 to 5 and that's it. But if the boss is staying till 7, 8 p.m. and sending emails at 10 p.m., that's
Right.
what the culture is. So there you go. That's the actual definition of how a culture is different from system. Right? You can change the policy on paper, right? But if you don't live it, then is it really making a difference? Is it making people's lives better?
Right.
And so when you start observing the culture of places, you start learning more and more about yourself. Oh, now I understand. This culture expects this of me, but that doesn't come naturally to me. So maybe I'm spending a little too much energy there. And maybe I need to pull back from this particular activity. It's literally simple things like that. You don't have to go big. You start small. You start with what you're doing right now, right?
Yeah.
If I start with my desk looks messy, I think I need to clean it up, right? Do I have the time to do it, first of all? Right? Do I have the capacity? Do I have the energy and the time to do it? And then is it possible to do? Right? And if those two things are lining up, then that means that matches your values. And so you should continue doing it if you're able. Right? But sometimes we get stuck in what I like to call the culture of obligation. And we feel like we do things or stay in things longer than we want because of obligation or because of letting someone else down or because of feeling like you are helping someone and so you don't want to back off. That always happens. And that always happens to people that care the most, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So I would say starting point, take stock. Awareness is number one. Step back and start noticing these things. Notice what a microculture is. What are the unsaid rules, even of your own household?
Yeah.
They might just be there and people don't say it, but everyone in your house does it.
Right. And I love it because it's so simple. Sometimes I think that when you hear something that sounds so simple, you're like, well, yeah, of course, but like what else? You're like looking for like the silver bullet, but it's like, no, that is the silver bullet.
No, exactly.
And so it's about like I like thinking of it in like if I'm involved in a task, is this something that makes me feel more free or makes me feel more constricted? Like, how does my body actually feel?
Exactly.
In wherever I am or whatever situation you're in or the task. And is this something that I want to continue? Do I have to do it? Those things.
Exactly.
So,
And that comes across in every single decision that we make, no matter how small. And when we make small decisions, we don't even think about them, right? I made up my mind last night that I have an early morning. I'm just going to grab a yogurt and go to my kids' concert. And I wake up and I get dressed and I get the kids ready and everything. And when it comes to get my yogurt, I realize we're out of yogurt. And so what do? I grab a banana instead and still be on my way. It was a decision I made.
Right.
But it was so automatic that we don't realize we made it.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And so if I step back and think, why did I pick the banana? If there was a plate of cookies lying on my counter instead of that bowl with fruit, would I have picked the cookies? Probably. Right? So it's not just about me and my motivation. It's also about what's available to me, what's possible around me. And that's what your system guides you with. What's possible within this system? What's possible within the realm of this microculture?
Well, and I guess then and you did give an example of it, but as a leader or a small business owner that is trying to create a certain culture, how would you advise? So you talked about something that the individual can do. As the organization, how do you think through that? And is it the same process or is there any different way of thinking about it or getting feedback from employees or
Absolutely, a great point. So one of the things that leaders that I work with often get stuck on, and This is the point that I try to drive home, even with individuals. What are your values? And organizations have values, right? Businesses have values. When they create their strategic plans, they create value, they create a vision, a mission, values. And a lot of people at the top cannot articulate their values to me off the top of their heads.
Mm.
And or some of them will tell me about one or two which are the focus of their department. Right? If there's a customer service department or a sales department, they might tell me about, oh, our value is to have open communication with our clients. And so customer service is number one. But what about the other values in that list? Do you know what they are? Do you abide by them? Do you follow them? And once you do that, once you start thinking about what your values are and see the alignment gap between what your values are and what you're actually doing, that is the lifestyle balance that I'm talking about. And so that can come for an individual person, but it also comes for organizations. So leadership, usually the first question that I ask is, what are your values? Do you know them? Do you like them? Do they still represent you? Were they created by a generation which didn't understand modern day-to-day life? Is it time to revisit this section of your strategic plan or your business model? So that's where I start, always. And once we have those set, that's when we start talking about, okay, what are some behaviors that don't line up with your values? And what can we do about them? Can we change them, right? Or can we mitigate in some way the harm that it's causing, or if it's not being able to meet one of the objectives? So one of the examples that I like to give is hiring processes. And the number one question that I believe that should be asked in any interview is, how do you think you will contribute to the values of this organization, and what will you bring to the table?
Love that.
It'll show you a few things. It'll show you that they did their research, that they at least looked you up and know what your values are. Because if they start struggling right there, this is not a serious candidate.
Yeah.
And second, they'll get an opportunity to really explain their skills to them instead of just telling you that they have this degree and this degree and this certification and that. So when people start applying their own actions with values, that's where the magic happens. That's where all of the work happens. And so, like I said, if that policy of 9 to 5 work existed and the boss says, 5 o'clock is a hard stop, I have a family too, and you all need to go home, right? It's a culture that gets set from the top.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I would tell business leaders, start with your values and take it all the way through. Take it all the way through. Do a culture audit. I typically, when I go into organizations, I do interviews and focus groups with, members of the organization, employees. Sometimes it's just one department. Sometimes I've done one time I had 12 leaders in the room, just 12 regional heads and the president and the CEO. That's it. That was my group. And it was great because we talked about values and none of them could tell me what their values were. Wow. And everyone was cheating and trying to look them up. And, so that was a really good session because that showed them something. That showed them how far they had moved away from what was really important to them, what the mission of their organization was in the first place. So, how people tell you, don't forget your why?
Yes.
That's what I would tell business leaders. Don't forget your why. What are your values? And are you living them day to day?
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. And a good reminder, again, I think as especially small business, it's, there's a lot of pressure on the owner to just drive, right? And so sometimes you don't realize unconsciously you're setting and creating this culture where,
Now, for that, I do have something that I do that helps me. And again, I stepped back and I realized that there were two different aspects of my business that I needed to focus on, right? And most businesses are like this. If you're a business owner, you work in your business and then you work on your business
Mm-hmm.
as a business owner. And for me, I realized those were two separate microcultures. And now I don't mix those tasks.
Mm.
Because when I do, I get all messed up in my brain. I'm foggy. I'm in, because at one end, I'm balancing a spreadsheet. On the other end, I'm still trying to create some content. And so my philosophy is single tasking is best. Okay. Multitasking requires you to switch codes, right, in your brain. And that takes up a lot of energy, more energy than we realize.
Mm-hmm.
And so single tasking as much as you possibly can is the solution to. So when I'm working in my business, I'm working in my business. And so I've even allocated times now. Sometimes I'll say, well, I'm more creative at night. So at night after my kids go to bed, I'll do content creation. Or sometimes I feel like, okay, I just have a few invoices to send out. I'll send those out after the kids go to bed while I'm working in my business during the day. Or maybe I'm having a meeting with someone for a collaboration. I might be meeting them during the time that I'm working on my business, right? And that might be during the day. So I budget my time and my energy like that because I know it requires different skills.
Yeah.
There are different expectations of me as a business owner as there are of a clinician or a coach or someone that's, client facing.
Yeah. I am like chuckling a little bit because as I have like a million tabs open, it's like,
Yeah, that's
close the
the
tabs,
one that, yeah, exactly. That's
in
what
your
I've started
brain.
doing.
Yeah.
I've
Close
started
the
doing it.
tabs. Yeah.
It's like closing the garden gate,
Yes.
right? Finish it and
Exactly.
close the garden gate, or give yourself a set time to come back to it and close the garden gate. Either
Yeah.
way, close the garden gate.
Either way. Yeah, exactly. I love that analogy. It's a great imagery
Yeah,
of how to,
yeah,
create those boundaries for yourself.
yeah,
And I'm
yeah.
curious, I know we have just probably just a little bit of time left, but
Mm-hmm,
because your background is with children,
mm-hmm,
and how do you, as a working parent, is there anything in terms of messaging work with
mm-hmm,
your kids, or so they
mm-hmm,
can understand? Like sometimes I know my kids will say, oh, we've got to get on we don't want to do a phone call with you in the car or whatever, they're like,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
oh, another phone call. So,
mm-hmm,
I've balanced that a little bit and tried
mm-hmm,
to create, again,
mm-hmm,
boundaries around time. But,
mm-hmm,
um, to, on one hand, you want to show your kids what drive and business leadership looks like. On the other,
absolutely.
you want them to know that it's not everything in life and that they're important too, and probably most important, and developing these little brains and little personalities.
Mm-hmm,
And so, how do you balance that?
mm-hmm. That's a great question. So again, I'm not going to say it's a balance because that's kind of like a false illusion that we're running after. But there
Mhm.
are intentional choices that you can make. So if the two situations are physically not able to be separated. So for example, you still have a work call to do, but the kids are in the car because you just picked them up from school. You got to do that, right? You got to do it. But then right after that, maybe you make a call to a family member and have the kids talk to them.
Mm.
Say, this is the time we connect with people. Or after this phone call, you get to pick what song I play. Or, just things that tell your kids why what you're doing is important. Oftentimes we feel like they won't get it. They don't understand. And a lot of times our instinct is when they say why, our instinct is to just say, because I said so, and I'm your mom, and you got to listen to your mom. So just go do it.
Right.
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 Especially when you have a 5-year-old like I do.
Right.
Um, but I have stopped myself from doing that. And I actually think about why I'm telling her to do something.
Hmm.
When I tell her 70 million times to go take a shower or get in the bathroom to take a shower, she asks me why. Why? I don't want to. Why? Why do I have to shower? And the right response is because that's a part of self-care.
Hmm.
And we should all maintain self-care. We should keep our bodies clean. We should keep our clothes fresh. So I try to explain things to her in her language, but I always tell her the truth.
I love that.
Yeah. And we think they don't get it, but they imbibe everything. So unfortunately, last year or 2 years ago, I went through quite an extended period of being ill for a long time and was in and out of hospitals and doctors. And it was a rough time. And she
Mm.
was 3.5 at the time. And she was 4, I think. And she noticed that I wasn't making it to any of her concerts. I wasn't making it to, and she would always ask, like, oh, is mama coming too? Right? Because her fear was that the answer is always going to be no.
Oh.
And now she sees it. And now she doesn't ask that question anymore because the assumption is I'll be there. And if we're not going to be there, then we tell her in advance, this one will be there, this one will not, or this time we can't make it, or, whatever it is. But we always tell the truth. Like, why couldn't you come? Because I wasn't feeling well, or because I had to take your aunt to the airport, which has happened in the past, right? So they understand these things. It's not always going to be logical. It's not always going to be a 3.5-year-old telling you, yeah, I understand that. Of course, that's an obligation you must fulfill to take your aunt to the airport. It's not going to be that way, right? But if you're able to explain things in their words, in their language, but always keeping the essence of the value you're trying to teach them. Why are you telling them to do something? You're telling them to do something because it's something that you value.
Yeah.
And what you're eventually trying to do is pass on that value to them.
Absolutely.
So think about it. Are there multiple ways that you're trying to instill a certain value? If one thing isn't working, can you try to instill that value in a different way? And then try this way, which they're so opposed to.
Right. So good.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Yeah. Of course.
And last question.
Of course.
Because I love asking this one. My listeners have heard this a lot. But is there one way that you find a practice or something that you do to ground or to, when you're looking for creativity or inspiration, what does that look like for you?
Yeah, and that looks different for everybody. So I'm happy to share mine. But it's what you're trying to do in those moments is you're trying to regulate your nervous system. And you're trying to move that nervous system from action into I need to be inactive for a moment to figure out where my next move is going to be. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to take your nervous system from sympathetic to parasympathetic. And the easiest, best, proven way to do that is deep breathing. And you do 4 breaths in, 7 breaths out. You always exhale longer than your inhale, and that is what activates your parasympathetic nervous system. That automatically brings your heart rate down, it brings your blood pressure down, it helps your muscles relax, and it works for me. It might not work for everyone, right?
Yeah.
But practicing that for me is something that's really grounding, and it's something I do every time I have to do code switch or role shift, or when I know something is going to carry with me. When I'm working on certain projects, I feel like they're gonna stay in my mind. Right? They're going to stay with me. It's going to keep me heavy throughout the day or with my family. And those are especially the moments where I do this, where I have to ground myself and say, I have to leave this behind here. I will return to it. But in this moment, I am safe from that. I am away from that. That is not my experience. And move on to the next thing and fulfill your role, your next role, whatever that may be.
Yeah.
That's
what I like the version of closing the gate with the 4 breaths in.
Absolutely.
And
4
7
seconds
breaths
in,
out?
6 to 7 out. Yeah.
It's
always, you always breathe longer on your exhale. Some people do 3 seconds in, 7 seconds out, or 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, whatever works for you, whatever your lung capacity is. The exhale should be longer than the inhale.
I love that. I love that also as a transition from one thing to the other. That's a great transition.
Absolutely.
So thank you so very much for your time. This has been wonderful. And I loved all of the insights that you shared. We're going to link your book in the show notes for anybody that wants to learn more. Again, called Cultures That Bloom. Take your organization from burnout to balance. And is there anything else? Is there any other great way that you'd love to connect with people? And we'll link it in the chat as well.
Yes, I mean, you all are welcome to follow me on social media. My company's name is Luminous Connections. So luminousconnections.net is my website. And you can find me at Luminous Connections on all the socials. So yeah, find me, connect with me. I'm looking forward to having more such conversations. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for being here.